day in the life of a true Brexit geezer. Wake up and meet the wife, Susan. My little princess. Isn't she beautiful? Time to take George to football. Rev up the Bugatti. Yee. Quick stop at Toby's and load up that plate. Get a pint. It's grand. Pitch looking lovely today, lads. Just a bit of banter. Chippy makes a 38-0 loss better. Pop down local pride, good old pie, look at that. Susan made dinner, lovely. Pop down, have a couple pints with the lads, and finish up at the Fortress of Dream.
Wow, what a funny and silly, quirky intro that somewhat relates, but mostly doesn't relate to the topic that I'm going to be speaking on today. Some of us are chill with being the average Coloradan weekend warrior.
Hey, give him a little boost. Yep.
But some of us want to get more days on the slope and they don't want to be spending that cash to go and get your turns on a snowboard. So I'm going to share my experience with you guys on how I can snowboard for free for most of the year. Now, I recently published a video called 3 Years of Snowboarding Progression, and it was a very popular video for my channel. It got a lot of views, and I got a lot of comments asking how can I possibly snowboard throughout the year, and where I live to snowboard, up until July and even August. And best yet, all those places that I have gone snowboarding in that video, I'd say 50% of them, I'd say 60% of them were completely free. They were outside of the resort. I'm going to share my experience with how I got into, outside of the resort snowboarding. Free snowboarding, if you will. Basically, I'm making this video because the best way for snowboarding to grow and to get more people snowboarding is to encourage the idea that you don't need ski resorts or expensive season passes to snowboard. All you need is a snowboard and a little bit of snow. To start off, my first time snowboarding was in 8th grade. I got a rental board, I went up, I forgot the resort I was at, but yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I would go 2 to 5 times a year ever since then until I was like 16. When I was 16, I got my license and I got my first real snowboard that I actually owned. So then I bought a season pass to Loveland Ski Area. I was a casual weekend warrior for about 1 or 2 months, and I'm like, dude, screw this. I want to go snowboarding all the time. I started where any snowboarder would, in their backyard. There was a small little hill in my backyard, and I would get my shovel, get a little crappy D.I.Y. rail, and I would learn beginner tricks. And the tricks weren't pretty. They were really bad looking, but that's why I was out there practicing, getting my snowboarding better, and just having a good time snowboarding after school and not having to worry about waiting the entire school week for some Saturday to go up and be in traffic. Now, the snow in the Denver area melts very quickly after the snowstorm, so you don't have a lot of time to take advantage of when it does snow. So anytime it did snow, I'd be out in the backyard or at any local hill, trying to get better at snowboarding. But when the snow melted, I was just back to being the classic weekend warrior, which is still fun, but I couldn't really progress like that as quick as I wanted. So being in the backyard and learning those basic beginner tricks made me realize that DIY spots are so much better for learning tricks than the terrain park. Mainly just because you're hiking in general. Whenever I'm at a terrain park, I constantly get distracted by the next feature, and I never just settle down and take the time to hike a feature so I can learn a trick. DIY is very good for learning tricks, and I realized I progressed so much quicker and I didn't have to wait till Saturday or Sunday to go snowboarding. So this was really my start of free snowboarding and getting after it outside of the resort. So that first season for me came to an end at the resorts around May, but I remember thinking, I'm like, why is the season ending? There's still so much snow. The resorts aren't making enough money in the late season, so they just shut them down. So I'm like, well, what am I gonna do with all this snow and me not being able to snowboard? And that's where I found out about Loveland Pass. You can hitchhike up to the top of it and get runs for days by the kindness of strangers. So it is a very groovy place that you can snowboard at for most of the summer. And this goes back to like the original idea that all you need to snowboard is a patch of snow, a shovel, and a rail. And with those 3 ingredients, you could get really good at snowboarding and learn a lot of stuff. Most of my improvement has definitely happened at the Loveland Pass D.I.Y. But then a couple years ago, I moved to Laramie, Wyoming, and I was way too far from the Loveland Pass D.I.Y. for me to possibly snowboard there in the summer. But luckily, I was still close to the Rockies, I was still close to high alpine terrain, and that's where I began snowboarding in the Medicine Bow National Forest. Now, Medicine Bow might not be a snowboarder's paradise like Loveland Pass is. There's no like D.I.Y. park or, you know, way to hitchhike to the top of it. But if you put in the work, if you're willing to hike to a glacier, it is such a fun place, and I've learned so much without all the luxuries of Loveland Pass. D.I.Y. spots definitely helped me progress the most in snowboarding, but another free method of snowboarding that I have used to progress tremendously is street snowboarding. Now, my very first street snowboarding experience was during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. Because of the pandemic, all the ski resorts closed down. They were even like monitoring Loveland Pass for a little bit. I just wanted to snowboard, and I was getting sick of just doing little DIY rails, and I wanted to challenge myself by hitting a couple handrails. So I hit a couple handrails for my first time, and I found out that getting a trick in the streets is so much more rewarding than getting the same trick in the terrain part. You had to earn it a little bit more. So if you want to snowboard for free, and if you want to progress at snowboarding very fastly, I highly recommend to start street snowboarding. And it doesn't have to be a gnarly, crazy handrail. In fact, most of the street spots that I hit are pretty mellow, but it just forces you to get creative with snowboarding, and it forces you to really figure out speed and just like kind of learn just the small little details about snowboarding better, and it will make you so much better than any terrain park possibly could. Street snowboarding became even more challenging for me when I moved to Laramie, Wyoming. Laramie, Wyoming is completely flat. It's not as developed as like Parker, Colorado, or the Denver area. It's a very small town, so there's not a lot of urban development, which makes it a challenge to hit the streets there. So many things can go wrong in the streets. Once you dialed it and you got the clip you wanted to get, or you got the trick you wanted to get, you just feel so rewarded because you know all the different things that can make you not get that trick in the streets. So if your town gets any amount of snowfall at all, I highly encourage you to take to the streets, make some DIY spots, and get after it before the snow melts. I hope this video answered the question of how I'm able to snowboard throughout the year, and I hope it gave you some ideas of how you can snowboard for free without having to touch a ski resort. Hopefully you guys can get into DIY snowboarding and street snowboarding too, and just really improve at snowboarding in general.